Figure skating is praised for its beauty, grace, and perfection, but beneath the applause and glittering costumes lies a far darker truth. The Olympic stage has created legends and claimed lives. From sudden medical collapses to catastrophic disasters far from the ice, these are the moments when triumph turned into tragedy and the world of figure skating was changed forever. Sabena Flight 548. Figure skating didn't lose a competition that morning. It lost its future. On February 15, 1961, a Boeing 707 descended through heavy gray skies toward Brussels Airport carrying 72 people on board. Among them were coaches, judges, parents, and every member of the United States figure skating team traveling to the World Championships in Prague. None of them would ever arrive. As the aircraft began its final approach, witnesses on the ground sensed something was wrong. The jet appeared to bank unnaturally, rolling in a way commercial planes were never meant to roll. Some described it as a sudden tilt, others as a desperate struggle against the controls. Seconds later, the Boeing dropped out of the sky and slammed into a frozen field near the village of Berg Kampenhout, erupting into flames. The impact was total. There were no survivors. What died in that field was more than a flight. It was an entire generation of American figure skating. The passenger list read like a blueprint for the sport's future. Among the dead was Marabel Vinson Owen, a former Olympian and 9-time U.S. national champion, widely regarded as one of the most influential figures in skating history. Traveling with her was her daughter Lawrence Owen, just 16 years old, the reigning U.S. ladies champion and a 1960 Olympian already being hailed as the face of the next era. Only days before the crash, Lawrence had appeared on the cover of Sports Illustrated, described as America's most exciting girl skater. She was expected not just to compete in Prague, but to contend for gold. Also on board were national champions, rising teenage prodigies, judges, federation officials, and parents accompanying their children overseas. This was not merely a talented team, it was momentum itself. The 1960 Winter Olympics at Squaw Valley had announced the United States as a rising power in figure skating. In one morning, that rise was erased. The official investigation later concluded that the crash was likely caused by a malfunction in the aircraft's stabilizer adjustment system during the landing approach, a failure that left the crew with no chance of recovery at such low altitude. Yet the explanation never fully silenced speculation. Some witnesses insisted the plane appeared to attempt a sudden maneuver. Others questioned pilot response, structural integrity, or unseen weather complications. In 1961, commercial jet travel was still relatively new. The Boeing 707 was advanced for its time, but aviation safety standards were still evolving. There were no cockpit voice recorders capable of capturing the final moments, no flight data systems detailed enough to reconstruct the truth. Only wreckage scattered across a cold Belgian field and 72 lives gone without final answers. The impact rippled far beyond Europe. The 1961 World Figure Skating Championships were canceled in mourning. Overnight, the United States was left without a national team. Coaches were gone. Judges were gone. Training systems collapsed. For years, American skating struggled to recover not because of lost medals, but because its institutional memory had been wiped out. Entire development pipelines had to be rebuilt from nothing. Out of the devastation came reform. The U.S. Figure Skating Memorial Fund was established to support future generations, a quiet promise that the sport would survive even if that generation did not. But some losses cannot be rebuilt. Every February, the skating world pauses not only to remember names, but to remember routines never performed, medals never won, and careers that never had the chance to begin. Did anyone in your family or someone you know lose their life in this plane crash? Let us know in the comments below. Lawrence Owen. Lawrence Owen was just 16 years old, yet by early 1961 she was already one of the brightest stars American figure skating had ever produced. She was the reigning U.S. ladies champion, a 1960 Olympian, and the youngest American woman to compete at the Winter Games. Poised beyond her years, she skated with elegant carriage, precise technique, and a musical sensitivity that set her apart from her peers. Only 10 days before her death, Lawrence appeared on the cover of Sports Illustrated, an extraordinary honor for a teenage figure skater at the time. The magazine introduced her as America's most exciting girl skater, a reflection of both her competitive promise and her growing public presence. Coaches praised her discipline and refinement. Judges admired her control and interpretation. To many within the sport, she was no longer a rising talent, she was an imminent contender on the world stage. By the winter of 1961, Lawrence was widely expected not just to compete at the upcoming World Figure Skating Championships in Prague, but to challenge for the gold medal. She represented a turning point in American women's skating, bridging classical elegance with the increasing athletic demands of the sport. At just 16, she embodied both youth and readiness, standing at the precise moment when promise begins to turn into inevitability. She traveled to Europe alongside her mother and coach Marabel Vinson Owen herself, a former Olympian, multiple-time U.S. champion, and one of the most respected figures in American skating history. Their journey symbolized the passing of knowledge from one generation to the next, experience guiding youth legacy moving forward. It was a partnership rooted not only in family, but in excellence and ambition. Lawrence Owen's life ended on February 15, 1961, when the aircraft carrying the entire U.S. figure skating delegation crashed during its landing approach in Belgium. The Boeing 707 operating as Sabena Flight 548 went down near the village of Berg-Kampenhout while descending toward Brussels Airport. All 72 people on board were killed, including Lawrence, her mother, fellow skaters, coaches, officials, judges, and parents traveling with their children. The official investigation later concluded that the crash was most likely caused by a malfunction in the aircraft's stabilizer adjustment system during the landing phase, a failure that left the crew with no chance of recovery at such low altitude. There were no survivors and no definitive record of the final moments inside the cockpit. For Lawrence Owen, the flight that was meant to carry her toward a world championship instead became the moment her life and her future in the sport abruptly ended. She is remembered not for a long list of medals, but for what she was about to become. At 16, Lawrence Owen stood on the edge of history. Her image on that magazine cover remains frozen in time, no longer a preview of what was to come, but a reminder of a career, a legacy, and a future that the world of figure skating never had the chance to witness. Stephanie Westerfeld. Stephanie Westerfeld was standing at the edge of something extraordinary when her life was cut short. Born on October 8, 1943 in Kansas City, Missouri, Stephanie was more than a promising figure skater. She was an honor student, a pianist, and a homecoming queen at Cheyenne Mountain High School, a young woman whose future seemed equally bright on and off the ice. By the winter of 1961, the figure skating world had begun to take notice. Stephanie had just finished second at the U.S. Figure Skating Championships, a breakthrough result that earned her a coveted place on the American team headed to the World Figure Skating Championships in Prague. It marked her transition from rising talent to legitimate international contender, a moment many young skaters spend years chasing. Stephanie did not travel alone. She boarded the flight with her older sister Sharon, who accompanied her as both chaperone and fellow skater. For their family, the journey represented pride, progress, and the fulfillment of years of sacrifice. For Stephanie, it was the first step onto the global stage she had worked tirelessly to reach. On February 15, 1961, that journey ended before it truly began. The Boeing 707 carrying the U.S. figure skating delegation operating as Sabena Flight 548 crashed during its landing approach near Brussels, Belgium. The aircraft went down in a field near the village of Berg-Kampenhout, killing all 72 people on board, including Stephanie and her sister. There were no survivors. Among the victims were established champions and nationally recognized stars, but skaters like Stephanie represented something different. She embodied the next wave of American talent, disciplined, technically gifted, and still unfolding. Her loss alongside her sisters deepened the tragedy beyond sport, turning national mourning into personal grief for families left behind. Stephanie and Sharon were later buried together at Evergreen Cemetery in Colorado Springs, a quiet and devastating echo of what should have been shared memories of competition, travel, and achievement. Their story became one of the many reminders that the crash did not only take legends, but also futures that had barely begun to form. In the aftermath, officials acknowledged that it could take years for American figure skating to recover, and in many ways it did. The tragedy reshaped policies, including the rule that entire national teams would never again fly together. It also inspired the creation of the U.S. Figure Skating Memorial Fund, ensuring that future generations could pursue the dreams that Stephanie Westerfeld and so many others never had the chance to realize. She is remembered not for medals won, but for the promise she carried. Stephanie stood at the threshold of a world just opening to her, a life defined by balance, discipline, and ambition. Her story remains a testament to potential interrupted and to a moment in skating history when the future disappeared in a single morning. Marabel Vinson. Marabel Vinson was not just traveling with the U.S. figure skating team on February 15, 1961. She was the backbone of American figure skating itself. A former Olympian who competed at the 1932 and 1936 Winter Games, Marabel was a 9-time U.S. national champion and one of the most influential figures the sport had ever produced in the United States. Her legacy extended far beyond medals. Marabel was a teacher, a mentor, and a builder of systems. She helped define what modern American figure skating would become, shaping generations of athletes with disciplined structure and uncompromising standards. Judges respected her technical knowledge. Coaches relied on her experience. Skaters trusted her guidance. For decades, her presence was woven into every level of the sport. That influence was deeply personal as well. Traveling with her on that flight was her daughter, Lawrence Owen, the reigning U.S. ladies champion and a 1960 Olympian. Marabel had taught her to skate almost before she could walk, guiding her development not only as a competitor but as a disciplined and composed athlete ready for the world stage. Together, they represented the past and the future of American figure skating, moving forward side by side. On the morning of February 15, 1961, that future ended. The Boeing 707 operating as Sabena Flight 548 crashed during its landing approach near Brussels, Belgium, killing all 72 people on board. Among them were Marabel, her daughter, fellow skaters, coaches, judges, officials, and parents. There were no survivors. The loss of Marabel Vinson was not simply the death of a former champion, it was the removal of institutional memory, leadership, and mentorship in a single instant. American figure skating did not just lose athletes that day, it lost the people who knew how to rebuild, how to train, how to guide the next generation. Entire coaching philosophies and developmental pathways vanished with her. In the aftermath, the sport struggled to recover. Without Marabel and others like her, American skating had to reconstruct itself almost from scratch. Out of that devastation came reform, including the creation of the U.S. Figure Skating Memorial Fund, a lasting commitment to support future skaters in honor of those who never returned. Marabel Vinson's legacy is not defined by how her life ended, but by what she built. She shaped champions, elevated standards, and helped turn American figure skating into a serious international force. When she was lost, the sport did not simply mourn a legend. It mourned a guiding force whose influence could never truly be replaced. Sergey Grinkov. Sergey Grinkov was only 28 years old when his life ended, yet his career had already secured him a permanent place among the greatest figures in skating history. Alongside his partner and wife, Ekaterina Gordeeva, Grinkov dominated pair skating for nearly a decade, winning Olympic gold at the 1988 Calgary Games and again at the 1994 Lillehammer Games, a rare achievement that defined an era. Their skating was known for its quiet power. Effortless lifts, deep edges, seamless transitions, and an almost invisible communication between partners. Unlike pairs built on tension or spectacle, Grinkov and Gordeeva projected unity and calm, making the most difficult elements appear natural. Off the ice, their relationship became one of the sport's most followed love stories. Married in 1991 and parents to a young daughter, they seemed inseparable both professionally and personally. On November 20th, 1995, during a routine rehearsal for the Stars on Ice tour in Lake Placid, that illusion of invincibility shattered. In a quiet rink without an audience or competition pressure, Sergey Grinkov suddenly collapsed on the ice. At first, some believed it was part of the choreography. Falls were not unusual in pair skating, but Grinkov did not get back up. Emergency responders arrived quickly. Coaches rushed to his side. CPR was performed and efforts continued for hours. Nothing changed the outcome. Sergey Grinkov was pronounced dead at the scene in the very place where he had spent most of his life, the ice. The cause of death was later determined to be a massive heart attack triggered by a congenital coronary defect and artery abnormally narrow from birth that restricted blood flow to the heart. Under extreme physical exertion, the condition became fatal. There had been no obvious warning signs. Grinkov was in peak physical condition, competing and touring at the highest level. In the mid-1990s, advanced cardiac imaging capable of detecting such rare abnormalities was not routinely performed on asymptomatic elite athletes. His death raised uncomfortable questions throughout the sports world. Could it have been detected? Could it have been prevented? Even today, the answers remain complex and incomplete. For Ekaterina Gordeeva, the loss was immediate and devastating. One moment she was skating beside her partner of more than a decade. The next, she was alone. The skating world reacted in shock. Olympic champions rarely die young. They almost never collapse mid-career, mid-season in full view of those who knew them best. Grinkov's death did not erase a generation the way other tragedies had. Instead, it fractured something more intimate, a partnership that had defined pair skating at its highest level. There was no mechanical failure, no aviation investigation, no debris to analyze. Just a human heart that stopped beating on cold ice. In the months that followed, discussions around cardiac screening for elite athletes intensified. The assumption that peak fitness meant immunity quietly disappeared. Sergey Grinkov's final image remains frozen in time, a champion mid-glide in control until he wasn't. His story stands as a reminder that even at the height of physical perfection, the most dangerous threats can remain unseen. Did you like today's story? Comment 1 if you did, and if you feel a sense of loss for the athletes who passed away. American Airlines Flight 5342. The night of January 29, 2025 began like thousands of others over Washington, D.C. The skies were calm. Commercial aircraft followed familiar descent paths toward Reagan National Airport, moving through one of the most tightly controlled airspaces in the world. Civilian traffic, military operations, and restricted zones overlapped with precision that was meant to prevent exactly what happened next. As American Airlines Flight 5342 approached its landing corridor, something went catastrophically wrong. In a matter of seconds, the aircraft collided mid-air with a U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter operating in the same airspace. Witnesses described a sudden flash in the night sky, a burst of fire suspended for a moment in darkness before wreckage fell toward the Potomac River below. Both aircraft were lost. All 67 people on board were killed. Among the passengers on Flight 5342 were figure skating coaches, young athletes, and parents returning from a national development camp, the quiet, unseen foundation where Olympic dreams are shaped long before medals and headlines exist. These were not celebrities traveling alone. They were families sitting side by side. Coaches reviewing routines, children discussing jumps they hope to master next season. Also on board were former world champions and Olympians Evgenia Shishkova and Vadim Naumov, a legendary pairs team who had transitioned from competitive glory to mentorship. After winning the 1994 World Championship, they dedicated their lives to coaching in the United States, helping guide the next generation of skaters. That next generation was traveling with them. The airspace surrounding Washington, D.C. is among the most heavily monitored on Earth. Every aircraft is tracked. Every clearance is deliberate. Every altitude is assigned. That reality made the collision even more unsettling. Investigators immediately began analyzing radar data, air traffic control communications, military coordination procedures, and timing sequences. Early reports suggested the possibility of miscommunication or altitude miscalculation within a complex civilian-military environment. But complexity alone did not explain how separation failed. Recovery crews worked for days in the freezing waters of the Potomac River, retrieving wreckage and victims in a painstaking operation. Across the country, families gathered in silent rooms waiting for confirmations they already feared. Within the skating community, disbelief quickly turned into devastation. Rinks dimmed their lights, skates were placed at center ice in quiet tribute, practice sessions were replaced by memorials. This tragedy differed from the catastrophe of 1961. That crash erased an entire national team. Flight 5342 struck instead at the developmental heart of the sport, the pipeline of future Olympians. Many of the young skaters on board had not yet competed internationally. Their names were not widely known, but within their world they were already stars. As investigations continued, public attention focused on air traffic control protocols, military flight coordination, altitude assignments, and collision avoidance systems. In a city built on redundancy and oversight, the demand for answers was immediate. For the skating world, however, no technical explanation could address the deeper question of why this flight on this night carrying so many futures crossed paths in the dark. January 29, 2025 became another date etched into figure skating history, a reminder that even in modern skies filled with advanced radar and layered safeguards, vulnerability still exists. The ice would open again. Competitions would continue. But for many in the skating community, every takeoff after that night carried a heavier awareness that sometimes even the most controlled paths can still collide. Ekaterina Gordeeva. Ekaterina Gordeeva was never supposed to skate alone. For nearly a decade, she and Sergey Grinkov were inseparable on and off the ice. Together, they defined an era of pair skating, winning Olympic gold in 1988 and again in 1994. Their performances marked by effortless lifts, quiet precision, and a unity that felt almost unreal. They weren't just champions. They were balance itself. On the ice, Gordeeva skated with calm control, absolute trust, and an emotional restraint that made their routines feel timeless. Off the ice, she was part of one of the sport's most visible love stories. Married in 1991 and raising a young daughter, Gordeeva and Grinkov seemed to represent something rare in elite sport: longevity, without fracture excellence, without chaos. That illusion ended on November 20th, 1995. During a routine rehearsal for the Stars on Ice tour in Lake Placid, Sergey Grinkov collapsed and died on the ice. In a matter of moments, Gordeeva lost not only her partner but the foundation of her life. The rink that had always been a place of precision and control became a place of shock and silence. In the months that followed, Gordeeva continued skating through grief that few could comprehend. The physical and emotional strain was immense. During training and performances in the period after Grinkov's death, she experienced episodes of extreme exhaustion and collapse moments when her body simply gave in under the weight of trauma. Though she survived, those incidents exposed a truth rarely acknowledged in elite sport: that emotional loss can manifest as physical failure even in the strongest athletes. Gordeeva's struggle was not the result of reckless elements or violent impact. There were no broken bones, no collisions, no visible injuries. The danger came from something less visible and far more difficult to measure: shock, stress, grief. The sudden absence of the person she had trusted with her life every time she left the ice. Her story stands apart from other tragedies in figure skating. Gordeeva did not fall because of a technical error or a medical defect. She faltered because the structure that had supported her for years vanished in an instant. In a sport built on partnership, timing, and trust, she was forced to relearn how to stand alone. Ekaterina Gordeeva did not die on the ice, but she skated closer to the edge than most will ever know. Her survival became a quiet testament to resilience, not the dramatic kind measured in medals, but the kind measured in continuing to step onto the ice after it has already taken everything from you once. Elena Berezhnaya. Elena Berezhnaya came closer to death on the ice than almost any figure skater in modern history and survived. In 1996, at the height of her career as a pair skater, a routine training session turned into one of the most horrifying accidents the sport has ever witnessed. During practice, Berezhnaya's partner fell. As he went down, the blade of his skate struck Elena's head with devastating force. The injury was immediate and catastrophic. She collapsed on the ice, bleeding heavily, barely conscious. What followed was a race against time. Berezhnaya was rushed into emergency surgery. Doctors discovered severe brain trauma and internal bleeding. The blade had pierced dangerously close to critical areas of the brain. For a time, her condition was uncertain. When she regained consciousness, the consequences were profound. She had temporarily lost the ability to speak, unable to form words, communicate, or even express the thoughts she was fully aware of inside her own mind. For most athletes, such an injury would have ended everything. Doctors warned that returning to elite-level skating might never be possible. Even basic coordination, balance, and neurological function were not guaranteed. The ice that had defined her life had nearly taken it away. Recovery was slow and painful. Berezhnaya had to relearn speech movement and control step by step. Training resumed cautiously, then gradually intensified. Against expectations, she returned to competition, not just to skate again, but to reach the very top. In 1998, less than 2 years after the accident, Elena Berezhnaya won Olympic gold in pair skating. Her comeback was not framed by spectacle or drama. It was framed by disbelief. A skater who had survived a penetrating skull injury and brain hemorrhage now stood on the highest podium in the sport. Her story permanently altered how the skating world understood risk. Pair skating, already dangerous, was revealed to carry life-threatening consequences even during routine practice. Berezhnaya's survival was extraordinary, but it was also a warning that in a sport defined by beauty and precision, a single moment of imbalance can turn lethal. Roman Kostomarov. Roman Kostomarov built his career on control, balance, and precision. As one of the most accomplished ice dancers of his generation, he reached the pinnacle of the sport, winning Olympic gold in 2006 alongside his partner Tatiana Navka. Ice dance, unlike pairs, is often perceived as safer. Fewer throws, fewer high-risk lifts, but Kostomarov's story revealed how fragile that assumption can be. During high-level training sessions, Kostomarov suffered serious injuries to his neck and spine, the kind that instantly raise fears of paralysis or career-ending damage. The incidents did not happen under competition lights, but during the repetitive, unseen grind of elite preparation where athletes push elements to perfection again and again. In ice dance, even a slight loss of balance during lifts, turns, or close contact elements can transfer violent force directly to the cervical spine. The injuries forced Kostomarov to halt training for extended periods and undergo intensive medical treatment and rehabilitation. For a sport that depends on absolute trust between partners and flawless physical synchronization, damage to the neck or spine is especially terrifying. One wrong movement can mean permanent consequences. Although he survived and later returned to public life, the episodes exposed a reality often overlooked by audiences. Ice dance may lack the explosive throws of pair skating, but it carries its own dangers, particularly when fatigue, repetition, and split-second misalignment intersect. Kostomarov's experience became a reminder that not all skating injuries are dramatic or visible. Some unfold quietly in practice rinks far from applause. Roman Kostomarov did not collapse mid-performance, and his name is not associated with a single catastrophic moment. Instead, his story represents something more subtle and just as unsettling: how elite figure skaters can come dangerously close to life-altering injury without the world ever realizing it. In a sport built on elegance and illusion, the body often absorbs far more impact than the audience is meant to see. Elena Berezhnaya. Elena Berezhnaya came closer to death on the ice than almost any figure skater in modern history and survived. In 1996, at the height of her career as a pair skater, a routine training session turned into one of the most horrifying accidents the sport has ever witnessed. During practice, Berezhnaya's partner fell. As he went down, the blade of his skate struck Elena's head with devastating force. The injury was immediate and catastrophic. She collapsed on the ice, bleeding heavily, barely conscious. What followed was a race against time. Berezhnaya was rushed into emergency surgery. Doctors discovered severe brain trauma and internal bleeding. The blade had pierced dangerously close to critical areas of the brain. For a time, her condition was uncertain. When she regained consciousness, the consequences were profound. She had temporarily lost the ability to speak, unable to form words, communicate, or even express the thoughts she was fully aware of inside her own mind. For most athletes, such an injury would have ended everything. Doctors warned that returning to elite-level skating might never be possible. Even basic coordination, balance, and neurological function were not guaranteed. The ice that had defined her life had nearly taken it away. Recovery was slow and painful. Berezhnaya had to relearn speech movement and control step by step. Training resumed cautiously, then gradually intensified. Against expectations, she returned to competition, not just to skate again, but to reach the very top. In 1998, less than 2 years after the accident, Elena Berezhnaya won Olympic gold in pair skating. Her comeback was not framed by spectacle or drama. It was framed by disbelief. A skater who had survived a penetrating skull injury and brain hemorrhage now stood on the highest podium in the sport. Her story permanently altered how the skating world understood risk. Pair skating, already dangerous, was revealed to carry life-threatening consequences even during routine practice. Berezhnaya's survival was extraordinary, but it was also a warning that in a sport defined by beauty and precision, a single moment of imbalance can turn lethal.